So we've arrived at the final modeling video. What we'll be doing in this video is creating the big M2 50 caliber machine gun that sits on top of our bulldozer. I'm going to start off with this box that I created as a blockout shape and just start adding in the main details. Now this machine gun, in contrary to the mount that I made in the previous video, there's really a ton of reference on this thing, so this wasn't that hard to create. On the other side, it has a few interesting shapes that are quite different from what we've created so far in the bulldozer, so these should prove interesting to model in this video. I think some of the most interesting modeling parts are actually even shown in this video, so definitely stay tuned. Right, so it's still just basic modeling, getting in some shapes. I'm adding in some extra segments here because there are actual holes in the side of this machine gun. See, there's this big long oval shape that sits on the side of the machine gun. Also, the thing is, this thing is completely asymmetrical, so I cannot work with symmetry, which means I have to repeat quite a few actions on the left and right side. So above this long stretched hole, there's a much smaller one. Creating that one as well. And next to that one, there's even another one. And then once the shapes for the holes are in, I select all those polygons and I extrude them inwards. I'm doing it twice to make sure that I have the nice chamfered edges. And the shapes of those holes, they look pretty good to me. So I have not added some of the edges on the top and the bottom, which was apparent when I added Turbo Smooth. Can't forget the edges here. That part at the bottom is slightly curved. So there we are. Okay, so really we got the basic edges down, added a small bit of details. And I decided to delete half anyway, because, well, the hole I created on one side is actually also present on the other side. So instead of doing that work twice, I'm going to start off with the symmetry, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to collapse it very soon. There are a ton of details that are not similar on both sides of the weapon. Now this weapon is made up out of a lot of separate parts. Metal plates fold around the bottom. The reason for that is this thing has to be easy to disassemble. Well, I'm not sure if it's easy, but you have to be able to disassemble it. So there's this this plate at the bottom that wraps around up to the sides. I'm going to create that. And this plate is actually the same on the left and right side, so I think I can still get this in my symmetry. Move that in a little bit, just to get the thickness right. Delete the inside. Once we have that done, add in the loops required for the smoothing. And a few subdivisions to make sure that I'm not subdividing a surface that is too big. Then we attach it. Add a small loop at the bottom there. And yeah, that looks about okay. There's this similar plate at the top, so I'm just copying this one, rotating it 180 degrees and moving it into position. It's slightly different though, it's a little bit shorter. And maybe I need to tweak the end a little bit, we'll see about that. There's also a second one that sits in front. But this one is quite different, it has a few different shapes. For example, there's this extruded part here, which is where the bullets are fed into the machine gun. This part is slightly extruded because the bullets go underneath that and go into the gun. Removing these. Why? Because I want the flow to be slightly different there. These here. That done. I can connect these up to the top. So. And then I can connect these like that. That way I have a better flow of my polygons in this part of the mesh. See, that's the exact shape I wanted, sort of pinched outwards instead of that extruded outwards look. Some slight adjustments at the plate at the bottom. These will serve for the attachment to the mounting brackets. You see I'm performing an extrude here, and this extrude will be the metal part that actually attaches to the piston for the dampening of the gun. So once again, I just need to use Swift Loop, then a few things to make sure that this is smoothed correctly. I'm just using Connect here. Sometimes it's faster, especially when your meshes get a bit dense. It can be a bit annoying to work with that. So there we are, and I think that looks okay. A little bit of a disclaimer here. While this gun only makes up for about, I'd say, 5% of all the modeling in the Bulldozer, I'm not going to go for ultimate accuracy. I'm just saying this because some people are extreme gun nuts, and they will be fascinated about the single position of a bolt in this gun. I'm not going to go all the way. This gun needs to be finished in a reasonable amount of time. I can't afford to spend as much time on this gun as I did with the rest of the Bulldozer. So this is the sights on top of the gun that I'm creating. These are pretty simple. Slight problem here. Remove that. There we are. Put those back in. Some more edges. Okay. We can also attach that part now. And we're still going on with the symmetrical parts of the gun. There's this cylindrical shape in the sights. That is also completely symmetrical, so we're modeling this as well. So of course you can understand I'm creating all the symmetrical parts first, and once I'm completely sure that those are all the way finished and up to standard as I like them, I will collapse the symmetry and continue with the asymmetrical details. So at the back, there's this cylinder that sticks out to which the triggers are attached. There's also a few handles there for the operator of the machine gun to hold and actually fire the thing. The shape isn't really difficult, save for a small detail on the end. See that right away, we'll get to it. I'm going to detach that to a separate mesh because it's easier for me to work with that way. There's this sort of horizontal slot running through the cylinder, and I can't model that together with the big cylinder that it's attached to. I have to make this a separate part to make it easier to work with. Selecting all of this, performing an inset. It's about okay, so I need to add a few extra edges here. Make sure the rounding stays there with the added edges, and perform an extra inset. And there's this little slot in here that I also want to model. This is a really tiny detail. Might not even be worth creating this, but I was getting a little carried away here, so I'm modeling it anyway. So scaling these outwards, shift scaling them outwards makes it easier to create these actual shapes. Then welding the verts together. And selecting the cap and then deselecting a few edges like I'm doing here, and then hitting bridge, and you can immediately fill up that cap. If I cap, there are no connecting edges in there. If I use bridge with this correct selection of edges, it is correct, so that's why I prefer using that. So I'm leaving this part separate for now. I might attach it when I collapse the symmetry, but as of now, it's not a part that can be mirrored along the center, so I'm refraining from attaching it. This is one part of the handles, the actual grip of the gun. Not sure how I should call this for a machine gun. I'll just call it the grip then. It tapers slightly towards the end, and I have to make sure they're small enough. That looks about right. These edges. And then you have these cylinders, which are the actual grips that the operator will grab onto. Reducing the number of segments, scaling that down slightly, and shove them together. They get a little bit fatter in the center, so they're slightly tapered outwards in the center. Need to add a few segments for that. One in the center, there we are. That correct tapering in there. And then we select these ring loops, extrude them outwards to get this slight beveled edge. Extrude them inwards, pardon me. Get this slight beveled edge there. Looks more interesting. Of course, make sure to add the swift loops to control the smoothing. And then use an inset here to make sure that that smoothing on the top is also nicely rounded and works. Okay, so this part should be about good. You can attach that top part and then copy it to the bottom to get the same thing there. This is a symmetrical part, so I'm attaching it. There you are, the back of the gun. So we've worked a bit on the back now. I'm going to focus a little bit on the front. I try to keep this balanced so I can keep a track of the entire proportions of the gun. That way, other than keeping things varied, it's also important so that I can keep track of overall proportion issues. If I notice that, oh wait, this back doesn't look right compared to the barrel, I can immediately fix that instead of detailing everything and then having to change even more once I notice things are not working out right. So this is another plate that sits around the top there. Nothing special. Adding control edges. And then attaching it. There we are. I'm thinking this needs to sit a little bit closer together. And I'm adding another part of the sights here. They have an interesting shape. I'm creating them out of a spline because I think that's easier. It's this arc shape that sits at the top on that plate that I just created. And I thought it would be easiest to create this out of a spline. I could also have used a tube and then deleted parts of it, but I prefer working with the splines. I think they are more dynamic and easier to control in terms of segments. So the operator looks through that sight at the back, through that sight at the front, and that's eventually how he gets his aim for this gun. Adding control edges. That should be all of them. Once that's done, I can attach this part as well. If I can attach a part that is symmetrical, I'm going to do it right away. But can't do it for everything anymore. So especially the cylindrical parts in the center, like at the back, the barrel, etc. I prefer not to use those with symmetry, even though it's possible. It's just harder with centered parts. So this is an asymmetrical part that I'm creating, and the reason for this part being asymmetrical is on the left side, bullets are fed into the gun. On the right side, they are ejected. So what I'm creating here on the right side is an ejection port for the bullets of the gun. This is a sort of mechanism that guides the bullets when they exit the gun so they don't fly the wrong direction. It's very simple, as you can see, just a tiny bit of box modeling. Not making things too complicated here. Moving these meshes around slightly. A little bit smaller on that side. And just positioning them extra box here at the bottom. Which I will then add the edges to once I've got the proportions correct. Edges are slightly upstanding. I'm simplifying these shapes slightly. I mean, in real life, these might be attached together or something, but for a part this small, this is only 5 centimeters long, 2-3 inches on a bulldozer that towers above people. I think it's not worthy of paying too much attention to the attachment of these parts. You have to keep things moving forward, so that's the reason for this. Interpreting reference is also sometimes simplifying reference. So there's this little rod running through these parts here. Add some edges to that. Some segments to make sure that it's subdivided correctly. And then attach all these parts together. So right now I attached it and it's symmetrical on both sides. I might have to do a slight bit of changing once the symmetry is collapsed. This is also an asymmetrical part. There's a plate at the side here, which has the slide of this machine gun moving back and forth. This had quite an interesting shape. You'll see right away when I get to it. I'm first getting the general shape right. And then we'll start adding details later. As you can see, this shape is also aligned with that hole that I created on the other side, and which is also now mirrored to this side. Adding a few segments which serve the purpose of giving the edges to extrude. Another slight extrude here. Then I'm selecting all these faces and extruding them inward slightly. Selecting the open edges. Extruding these down, and then I'm going to weld them. So you see there's this sort of intricate system with slots and lowered and raised parts. And I really had to study this part quite closely. I'm not really sure what it does or anything, but it's this single piece. I guess it's cast iron or steel or something. And the shape really is quite interesting. It has rounded parts, it has sharp parts. There you go, that's how it looks. Very typical part of this gun. It really stands out, so I felt like I had to do this right. That part looks a little bit too rounded, so it needs another few loops to control that. Back, we also get a little bit too much rounding. I'm just making sure we're controlling everything here. So I think that looks right. This might have to be slightly higher to accommodate that slot a little bit better. Yeah, that's it. I think this is a really cool looking part. Immediately makes the gun more typical. So here's an extra part. And by now I'm thinking it might be better to actually keep the symmetry on the body of the gun and have all the asymmetrical parts, since this gun is built up out of separate parts, and keep them separate. Don't attach them, and make things work that way. I think it's probably even a better and less destructive way of working. You can't do this with everything. I mean, this gun is luckily made up out of separate parts, so we can do that, but it wouldn't work for everything, so keep that in mind. So this is a little handle thing for the slide that will move back and forth. It's a funny shape. This will slide back and forth in that slot we just modeled. Attaching this together. The slot is slightly inset. Like that. And there is a sort of grip part at the top. when you need to eject a bullet manually, this gets pulled back, I guess. Not too sure. I haven't operated any weapons myself, so I don't know. Let's set this part. It's nothing difficult. And once I've completed all these extrudes and insets here, I need to use Swift Loop to add a little bit of tapering here. I seem to usually do this with round parts that humans are supposed to grip onto. I guess it makes them easier to hold due to the shape of the hand. It's a little thing that you need to pay attention to. So pretty cool about this gun is that it's not using the same nuts that we've used all the time. It has these, they might be pop rivets, I'm not sure, but they don't have that hexagonal shape. They are half spheres, half domes that, well, they are domes that sit on top of the surface and hold things together. So I'm just creating a simple cylinder, deleting one half, and then using that as a simple detail. So just moving this around. I haven't created a separate object for this. Don't think that's necessary. There we are. These look spaced apart nicely. A little bit of tweaking left. Copy them to the top. Start spacing these as well. It's quicker if you space, select 2, then go for 4, etc. There's some more here at the bottom. Just going to space these apart too. I don't think it's worth it creating the ones behind the mounting clamp. Do on this side also. You should note that this gun is a pretty old gun also. I think they've been using this since World War II, and it's still in service. It's definitely not as modern as some weapons you might see today. That's why some of this construction might seem a little bit primitive compared to today's standards. So really just going around and adding all these rivets. This sort of thing is what really brings the gun to life. Okay, so I've created a simple cylinder here at the front and did a few extrudes. I didn't show you that because, well, as you can see on the shape, pause it if necessary. You can see it's not hard to do that. And this will serve as the barrel for the gun. With that done, try to eyeball the general proportions here and create the muzzle at the front. I noticed on reference pictures that the muzzle differs between versions of the gun. Some of them have different muzzles. Doesn't really matter, I'm just picking one that I'll be creating. Adding the loops here. And this part of the barrel is also not the most challenging or difficult part. There's another part we're creating right away, which is a really cool way of tackling this. So you see these details here. Not too difficult to create. Again, pause the video if you want to get a close-up. Okay, so pay close attention now. What we're doing is there's a cylinder that is wrapped around the barrel, and the cylinder has holes in it, alternating holes. There's like, I think it's 4, 3, 4, 3. This is wrapped around the barrel. If you've tried this before, then you should know that this sort of holes in a cylinder is pretty difficult to get right in with Turbo Smooth. So what I'm doing is I'm going to create it as a flat surface and then wrap it as a cylinder with the bend modifier. So I've created my plane here, subdivided it and by counting the number of holes, and then use the bend modifier. And the bend modifier and the sides of the plane are determining how big my cylinder is exactly. It's more difficult than working with a straight cylinder, but again, this is the only way of doing this decently. Reducing the number of segments also, they need to match the fact that all these things have to be perfect squares. Once that's done, making sure that all these parts are squares, There we go. I select alternating holes that will be created in this plane. Using an inset, selecting the ones next to it, using an inset. I can't do them all at once because they would form one big hole then instead of separate ones. Again, select these, inset, it remembers the settings, and then select the alternating ones. So as you can see, it's 4, 3, 4, 3, 4. Once I have all these holes, I'm going to select them again. Try to using a different selection mode. It doesn't work for this type of thing. There we are. Once this is done, I'm going to delete them and select their borders, and then use the crazy loop tools on them. Now the problem is the loop tools are messing things up a little bit, and they're making some of them bigger than others. Once again, loop tool, can't really trust it that much. The bottom ones look good though. So what am I going to do? I'm simply going to delete the bad ones once I got messed up and copy these into their places. Alternatively, you could try and scale all of them to the same size, but that's not really that much of a good idea. So I'm just going to copy them. Selecting 3, selecting 4, etc. Using snapping. Without snapping, this would not be possible. I could also use element selection to make this easier for me. And then welding things together. There you go. You can see I've created a cylinder with holes in it. And it's been a lot easier than doing it as a cylinder instead of doing it the other way around. Alright, so I extrude these inwards to get the thickness in there. I want to do the same thing for this part up front. So you got to remember now that when I add Turbo Smooth on this, it's going to mess a little bit with the smoothing. See, there are problems here. It has a seam on one end, and it has some bumps in other places. So there is actually a way to fix this. I add a single Turbo Smooth, and then on top of that, I've added a weld modifier that welds these things together. And then on top of that, I add another Turbo Smooth. So what I'm doing is I'm doing a sort of two-step Turbo Smooth with a weld in between. This is a little trick I picked up from Racer445, so thanks to him for that. He calls this double smoothing. I'm using a sort of variation on that to fix this specific problem, but it works very nicely. So if necessary, go back in the video, check it out again how I'm exactly doing it. Also, this part is slightly tapered, so of course I'm using a taper modifier. It's really slight though, so need to add some thickness here at the back. There we are. I think this is one of the most interesting and coolest parts on this gun. And there's a pretty fun way to fix this. Okay, so there's a little bit of detail left. Slight block that sits on top of this cylinder we just created for attachment to the main body. I'm simply going to use a box primitive for that. Add some edges to make sure that things move correctly. Alright. There's another extruded part here, which I'm going to get to in a minute. Add some edges first. Move these down. It's this sort of small ridge part that's extruded. I felt it was necessary to add this. Okay, so that's in there. Make sure the rounding is right. And we can just attach that to the main body due to it being symmetrical. And I'm detaching it and copying it to the bottom. simply just reattaching it to the body. It's on two sides. Okay, so there's only a few details left here, not that much work. There's a big nut that fastens this handle to the slide. And there's also a small detail here, a little bit of I think it's a hinge part on the bracket at the bottom that I had overlooked. So I'm deciding to add this a little bit later on. And these things attach like that. It looks a little bit messy and tacked on if I don't create a decent attachment like it was before. So I'm fixing that afterwards. Like I said, it looks too simple, under detailed. That looks good. I think I should add a little bit more detail here at this part as well. So I'm adding a ring around there. And the reason for me creating this ring is, well, we've got our mounting bracket, we've got our gun, but there's one thing missing for this thing to work, which is bullets. And these are mounting clamps for the ammo box that sits on the side of the gun. We've all seen these types of guns, right? They have this big box full of 50 caliber bullets hanging on the side, and they're fed into the gun through a chain or a belt. So we're creating these little mounting brackets, which of course will feature nuts to fasten them together. Attach this to the other side and copy them over here. Rotate them around. Should be right. Okay, so we got this clamp. Now I'm going to create the base for the box to attach to. Big stretched metal parts. And the box isn't just a simple box. There's more to that shape than you would think. So I studied the reference a little bit, try to make out what it was built up out of, and modeling that in. There's two clamps. Fasten the box really tightly and securely. Attach these to the main part. Look at that, it's looking a lot interesting already, a lot more interesting due to the added details. Okay, so the box, I'm not going to start with a box primitive for that, contrary to what you might think. I'm going to start with creating a few sides to it, since that will be easier for me to model the thing out of. It's a pretty specific shape, so I'm trying to get that right. And it sits in this sort of, I'll call it a bracket, and in that bracket they place the actual box. So this is the bracket I'm creating here. Selecting these edges, then bridging them up, and that's the basic shape for the ammo box bracket. Adding these control edges in. And scaling this together, moving it up. Alright. Bracket looks about right. Let's add a turbo smooth to check out how it looks smoothed. And I accidentally pasted a symmetry also, so just delete that. Shape in here, and this one will be the actual ammo box. So for this I am using a box, right? Not for the bracket. That looks about right in terms of proportions. I'm deleting the underside because I don't think I'll need that. Inset and then extrude that inwards. Why? Well, I don't want the box to be closed. We're going to fill it with bullets in a moment. There's a slight ridge that will be extruded around the edge, so I'm adding that as well. And adding some of the extra loops. For these loops, again, I'm using connect instead of swift loop because they need to be symmetrical on both sides. A bit easier to use that tool then. Once that works, I'm going to attach this to the bracket part. So that looks about right. There's an extra plate attached here to the side, so I'll be modeling that. And again, these details can differ a lot between guns. I'm just picking this from reference that I found all over, thinking what might look more interesting and adding what I like. Not too sure what this part is, but it looked interesting, so I'm adding it. We are adding some extra edges. And I'm going to add that nut, of course, a way of showing how these are fastened together. Using that trick with creating a cylinder with auto grid and then using the align tool. Once this detail is done, I'm attaching everything. Alright, so this box has a little lid that covers it. And I'm going to create that out of a spline because it has a specific bend shape, which is easier for me to create out of the spline. You don't have to create it out of the spline, you can do it differently. I just prefer to do it this way. Once the basic shape is right, I turn it into an edit poly and add these control edges. This lid isn't too big also, it's just a small part. Again, I'm using a spline here to create the second part of the lid. Which sits on top like this. And I'm not exactly sure why they're creating a lid like this. I think to refill these boxes or something. But the shape is pretty cool. So once that's done, turn it into an edit poly. Make sure to go in and delete that triangulated face. We'll fix it up. And then add the edges in there. So this looks about right. I'm attaching things together. Not the wrong way around. You can see it gives you some problems. Okay, so all that's left to do here is add the actual bullets into the gun. First, I'm drawing a spline that will form the line along which the bullets will flow, the actual belt. I'm trying to position that right. It needs to look natural. Okay. And then I'm going to model a bullet shape. And we're going to do the same thing as the tracks here. Instead of using track links, we're going to use bullets and use the script from the tracks video to multiply these bullets along the spline. So a 50 caliber bullet model, the last thing we'll be modeling for this bulldozer, should be pretty easy after everything you've seen. Using just a little bit of reference, I looked up a specific picture of a 50 caliber bullet to make sure I did things right. So modeling the casing. And then once I have the casing, I can start modeling the actual bullet in there. And you see I detached that part because I think since they're separate parts, I need to model them separately. And here's the actual bullet with its tapered end. Slightly smaller like that. Okay, so apart from a bullet also, these bullets are linked together as, they call this a belt or chain, not too sure even. And these are these small parts that they slip around the casing of the bullet and they link into the next one. So it works kind of like the tank track links that we just saw. And I looked up a reference picture of that and I'm also modeling it right now. It's pretty easy to create. You can see something like that. Making sure it lines up nicely. I'm not going to put too much intention in making it look exactly like it does on the pictures. It's a very, very small detail, this, so some simple modeling should be enough. So that's it for the bullet. I'm placing the spline for the tracks for our bullet belt in the correct position. And then I'm going to go into my TrainMaker script and set things up to add the bullets. As you can see, there's a bit of a problem with the alignment. So I'm fiddling a little bit with the options and need to move these bullets slightly so they're in the correct position. And I think that looks about right. Might need to be a little bit chunkier. Like that. Now there might be a little bit too much, so I'm reducing the number. And with that done, I think that's it for our 50 caliber MG. I'm just going to put it on the correct layer. And there we are. That's it for the modeling of our bulldozer. Next video, we'll get to rendering. Looks pretty cool, right?